Eccoci ragazzi, ben ritrovati in questo nuovo episodio di Performance Talks. Oggi io e Andrea abbiamo il piacere di avere qua con noi Mike Young. Welcome in our podcast, Mike. That's a real honor for us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be on.
Okay. Welcome. So let's start. Can you please give us a little introduction about you? What are you currently doing and stuff like that?
Sure. So I've been coaching for over 20 years. I balance my work in between sports science and coaching. I have an academic background in exercise physiology, coaching science, and biomechanics. I have my PhD in biomechanics with a minor in physiology. But I've coached mostly and worked in applied sports science. So as a coach, I've worked in the sports of athletics, track and field, football, European football, and I've trained quite a few athletes in a variety of what would be considered major American sports, basketball. I have quite a few NBA players. I actually have a player who played over in Italy just very recently, and NFL football. I own Athletic Lab Sports Performance Training Center. We've been in business for about 12 years. We are a sports performance training and research center. We handle everything from youth athletic development to professional and Olympic level athletes and even general fitness. And then I also am the performance director for the largest North American soccer club. We have 14,000 kids, 14,000 athletes in total. Athletic Lab trains the younger groups, the academy and so forth, and then I train the first teams. I work primarily with the first team women, which are one of the best women's teams in the world. And then some of my assistants actually work with the men, which are right now the men are in the second division for US soccer. We handle a lot of team training, general fitness training, and then I'm pretty heavily involved in coaching education. So just recently launched Athletic Lab Academy, which is an opportunity to bring our education that we've primarily been doing on site to an online format. And then also the LTAD network, which I've launched with my friend and business partner, James Baker, as a long-term athletic development focused web platform where we have videos and education from a variety of practitioners, as well as updates weekly on podcasts and video chats and so forth. So I'm a huge product of a strong coaching education. I've had some fantastic mentors over the years. So I really feel like it's something that I need to give back to myself, and have been over the past 20 years or so have really become invested in becoming a better teacher and passing on whatever information that what I have learned from those who've helped me out.
Okay, perfect. May I say one little thing? I came to know you when I was studying back in UK at Harbury in Gloucester. So, and I remember that everybody was talking about you and James Baker. So I was pretty fascinated about everything you did back then. And, after that, I started to look at your Instagram and everything you were doing. And I remember there was, I don't know how to call it, but there was an event. I don't remember anymore the name, but I couldn't make it. And I was like, damn, I have to do it. And unfortunately I couldn't make it. So yes, from that time, it's like 2 years ago that I got you on my radar, if it doesn't make sense. So every time I have to look for some sort of information and some sort of insights from strength conditioning professional, we always look up at you and also the work James Baker do. So before this little thing that I said, moving on, I'll start with the second question would be in regards of strength, because we kind of know, even listening from previous podcasts you did, that you are a strong believer in strength, and you also got a true passion about strength training, which does not, I don't want to say that that's primarily what you're doing, but it's a consistent part of your training schedule. So my question is about strength standards, especially because you work with soccer, with football, and maybe here in Europe, as you already know, we are a little bit behind in that sense. So if you talk about a little bit, about strength standards in regards to from track and field and then soccer, and how strong is strong enough to play those events?
Sure, that's a great question, and it's one we could speak the whole hour about, really. I think it really depends to some extent on the level of development of your athlete and their current sport. So the way that I think about it is that sports that are very, very physically oriented, meaning an athlete's physical performance dictates their success or failure in the sport. So activities like track and field, Olympic weightlifting, swimming perhaps might be a good one. Those are activities or sports where the training and your physical capacity is effectively synonymous with success in the sport. If you contrast that, however, with many team sports, say, for example, football, that there we've seen many players be very, very successful, and they've never stepped foot in the weight room, or they haven't done much in the work of off the ball conditioning or speed work or what have you. And so I think we need to first clarify what athlete are we talking about here? The more physically demanding the sport is, meaning does your physical capacity dictate your success in the sport? And surely it has some effect in all sports, but in a sport like track and field or weightlifting, clearly it's you don't get away on strategy. You don't get away on your brain like you might in football. You don't get away on tactical skills. It is largely based off of how strong you are, how powerful you are, and how fast you are. So if we're dealing with sports like that, I think it does become quite relevant to have strength standards. If the sport has more strategy, more technique, more tactical, then the strength or the physical side of it plays a smaller role. So while we may have strength standards, they are less important, and they probably don't need to be developed to the same degree as we might see in a sport like weightlifting or track and field, say. So I will talk about this in kind of the two different domains. If we look at a sport like track and field, I don't have hard strength standards where I say, for example, that you can't do plyometrics if you don't squat 2 times body weight. But I do have basic strength objectives that I would like to see athletes get to. So I look at both the absolute loads or the absolute load as a percentage of body weight. And then I also look at the ratios of the strength across different lifts that I look at. So for me personally, I really only will test 3 lifts. We'll test a squat. We will test a bench press for some athletes, and we may test a power clean. So those 3 lifts. Now, in terms of a strength standard, generally speaking, I'd like to see athletes hit about a 2 times body weight squat for a full depth. For most of my athletes who are competing in the sport of track and field, I currently have about 15. All of the men do that quite easily. My male track and field athletes on average are squatting about 2.4 times body weight. That may actually be in excess of what is necessary. I have some very strong individuals. Once we get to that benchmark, I take my foot off the gas a little bit. So I'm no longer trying to develop strength. It's not as beneficial as it would be, say, if they were weaker. I like to see power clean at about somewhere between 1.25 and 1.5 times body weight for a male athlete. And then I like to see the bench press roughly equivalent to the power clean. So 2x body weight for a squat, roughly 1.5 times for a clean, and 1.25 or so for a bench press. And then based off of those three, I can not only look at them where they are relative to body weight, but also relative to each other. So I could see if someone is excessively weak in one area or not. Certain athletes, I may throw in a weighted pull-up test as well. I've had swimmers do weighted pull-up tests, and there's, in all cases, these numbers that I'm coming up with or giving you are not just pulled out of the air. There's considerable research to suggest that up until about a 2 times body weight squat, you will see improvements on vertical jump, on short accelerations, even change of direction. Around 2 times body weight, that doesn't go away, that improvement doesn't go away, but it reaches a very steep diminishing returns. So at around 2 times body weight, for example, on a squat, you may not want to continue to improve the squat because it doesn't help you that much anymore in your sport. But up until that point, you'll see pretty significant improvements. Bench press, I really only test with my athletes who are throwing. So if I have an overhead athlete, they throw, perhaps they're a shot putter, then I'll test bench press. For all of my athletes, I will usually test the power clean and look at it in comparison to the squat. And then again, I have some normative data there as well that suggests that around 1.25 to 1.5 times body weight on a power clean, you will continue to see improvements on sprint times. Sprint times, change of directions, even jumping. Now, this relationship between strength and power continues up until the athlete gets to around those strength ratios. Some of those ratios are not extremely high. I would guess if you went to your average fitness club in Italy or the US or anywhere else, you may find individuals who are quite easily squatting 2 times body weight. So it's not like we're trying to get these athletes to become elite strength athletes. We just need them to be competent in the weight room. And even if they're only able to squat 1 times body weight, improving them to 1.2 times body weight or 1.4 times body weight is going to prove beneficial. In fact, they'll see significant gains there, perhaps more significant gains on sport performance if they improve from 1 times body weight to 1.2 times body weight than an athlete who was already at 2 times body weight and improved to 2.2 times body weight. So taking a relatively weak athlete and making them a little bit stronger will yield huge improvements on sports performance. Now, with my football athletes, so I almost look at them at the other end of the spectrum. We do, generally speaking, have very strong football athletes that I work with. Our men's team, on average, squat about, by comparison, it's a full squad of 24 athletes, squat about 1.5 to 1.6 times body weight. So it's good, but it's not high, super high level, but it's quite good for a squad of 25 players across the board. Some of them may be able to squat 2 times body weight. We don't actually max them, to be honest with you. I'm just basing this off of their working weight. So in the sessions, we may have them work up to heavy 3-rep sets, and I can see what they use. And I know that the men are approximately 1.5 times body weight, maybe as much as the stronger individuals, maybe as much as 1.7, 1.8 times body weight. Now on the women's side, all of those numbers, generally speaking, will be slightly lower, especially for upper body testing. Women generally need to be about 0.8 times body weight to 1 times body weight for a bench press. But on a squat, they'll be relatively close. I do have some women that can squat as much as 2 times body weight, and they're very strong and powerful. On the power clean, they tend to be a little bit lower, probably 1.2 times body weight. not too many that are up around 1.5 times body weight who are not Olympic weightlifters. But our women's soccer team, our women's football team, they tend to be quite strong, similar to the men, but even more so. So we have quite a few women on the team. This is the group that I coach full time on, who are able to power clean about body weight to 1.2 times body weight. So these are football players that are reaching the upper threshold of diminishing returns for strength. And then these athletes can squat probably in the range of about also 1.5 times body weight. So relatively speaking, and it is a first team women's club versus a second division men's team. And our structure for the men's team is that it's similar to an academy, meaning we have some players that move up and down. They're a little bit younger, but our women's team, our first division, we will probably send 10 athletes to the Olympics. We had 4 athletes win at the World Cup 2 years ago. So and I've been training them for 5 years, pretty highly developed female athletes, as strong as you're going to see in the women's game. And some of them are about 1.7 times body weight on the squat. So very strong individuals. Now, with my football players, I don't actually push them to achieve these metrics of 2 times body weight, say on a squat, because this is just one small aspect of their performance. I will train them in a way that they will continue to improve on the squat, but it's not as if we are chasing the numbers per se. So at no point in time would I pull an athlete aside and design a special program for them if they only squatted 1.2 times body weight. We'll just continue to progress them up, and everyone will move forward. They all have room to improve before they reach the point of diminishing returns, which occurs again somewhere around 2 times body weight. Now, we certainly have athletes that come in who are weaker than that. And, sometimes the question becomes, as you said, how strong is strong enough? I've somewhat answered that already. I'll return to it in a minute. But we also have the question of at what point do we stop developing strength if an athlete is weak? If an athlete is weak, do we focus on power or should we focus on strength? Well, while it may be tempting to take an athlete who is very weak and just say, let's focus on making you faster, the research actually indicates that you would be better off taking this weak athlete and making them stronger. So improvements in speed and power will be greater by improving strength than by focusing on power when an athlete is weak. So if, for example, you had a very weak athlete, whether they're younger, maybe they're younger and they've never been in the weight room, maybe they are never been in the gym, it's a more mature athlete, they've never spent any time in the gym, they're actually going to see greater improvements on speed and power and jumping if you just make them stronger. And these athletes, it doesn't even matter if you take them from up to a 2 times body weight squat. Just getting them to a 1 times body weight squat, we'll see huge improvements on their performance. So I call it low hanging fruit. Do you have that saying in Italy?
Yeah.
It's easy, right? It's very easy to see these improvements. If you take someone that comes into your gym and they can only perform a very poor body weight squat, and you can get that athlete to say a 1 times body weight squat, that's not all that difficult. Doesn't take a master strength coach to be able to do that. Get them to a 1 times body weight squat, and they will have huge improvements on speed, strength, and power, especially early phase acceleration. So while it might not be a focal point of mine, if I had the choice with a weak athlete, I would actually look to get them stronger before I would move to more power focused training. So let me move to the other part of that question, which I briefly touched on, and that's how strong is strong enough. it's a really great question, and it almost doesn't have an answer, because on one side you could say you can never be strong enough, right? There's never going to be a detriment, a negative to being too strong, right? But in reality, there is, because it comes to get that strong comes at a cost. So the way that I think about it is that we should aim for these points of diminishing return and then move on. If someone happens to be very strong or gets strong very easily, then there's not a problem with that. We can kind of let that happen and put the strength aspect of training into maintenance mode. But if someone reaches those levels, we don't necessarily need to continue to develop them, because pursuing strength just for the sake of improving these numbers will not necessarily improve their performance on the field, on the pitch, on the track. So once we've reached these kind of thresholds that I've put up there, then I won't necessarily continue to really, really drive hard at them to move beyond it. Because developing strength does come at a cost, both recovery-wise and training-wise. The way that I think about things is that we only have so many hours in our day. We, for example, can devote 2 hours to training perhaps, or if you're lucky, 3 hours to training in a day. And if that's the case, you now have somewhere on the order of 12 to 20 hours of training in a week. You now have to ask yourself, what is important? I have a finite amount of hours in the week. We do a thought exercise with our interns at Athletic Lab, and we ask them, if you were on a desert island, an imaginary desert island, and you could only do 2 exercises or 5 exercises or whatever for the rest of your life, what would they be? And it starts to make you think about things in terms of a hierarchy. What's important? And that's how we should look at every single day. We are very tempted as coaches, especially in today's social media age, to see a million different exercises and workout options at our disposal on Instagram and YouTube. And it's very tempting to want to include all of these different great ideas. And in their own right, each exercise may be fine. But the reality is that we can accomplish very much with very little if we focus on the right things. So if you just take a scattershot approach and do, say, 1 set of 20 different exercises, and then include your balance work and your mobility work and your activation work and everything else that you've seen on Instagram, and you've never focused anywhere in particular, then you may actually not have the results that you want. So what I'd suggest is that we need to focus on what is going to yield the greatest results. Well, early on in an athlete's development, strength is actually going to have huge impact on performance. But later in a athlete's development, in particular, if they get very strong, now improving strength may not improve performance. I have a long jumper that I work with right now. He actually joined me. He came to me and he was already squatting 2.3 times body weight. So he was a 70 kilo, 75 kilo guy and was squatting, massive amounts. And he's since improved on that while training with me. But now I'm at the point where we don't train above 80% of his max load at all year long. All we do is we try to move lighter loads more quickly. And we've taken a lot of the volume away from maximal strength training, which is what he did on his own before he came to train with me. And we put more emphasis on plyometrics. Now, if I took that same approach with a 12-year-old girl who can't do a body weight squat, she wouldn't see the same improvements in performance because she hadn't reached the threshold of a strength level that was necessary to perform at a high level. And there's some interesting research now that basically just says if you're of adequate strength, that continuing to improve strength, in particular in what would be called your slower grinding lifts, the heavy squats and deadlifts and bench press, and if you're at adequate strength levels, that continuing to improve them is not going to yield greater performance in more powerful activities, because the way that we produce force is very differently. Basically, when we move really fast, if there's too much tension in the muscle, it actually creates its own internal brake. So we need to have the way that I think about much of things in sports performance is kind of like the story of Goldilocks. Do you have this in Italy?
No, we don't, unfortunately.
No? Okay, so I'm sure you may have an equivalent parable or fairy tale or something, but it goes something like this. You can have the moral of the story is that you can have just right, you can have too much, or you can have too little. In our world, the sports performance world, in particular in the US, where everything is bigger is better, we have this mentality is more, that we get into this notion that let's just max everything out. Let's get strength as much as possible. And the reality is that if we were to push strength as much as possible, it might actually come at a cost to our speed and power work. And if our focus is over here, then it's actually going to take away from performance. So rather than look at it as let's just max strength, get it as high as possible, we need to look at it as let's get the right amount of strength, the optimal amount of strength, which is somewhere in the ballpark of that 2 times body weight squat, 1.5 times body weight clean, etc. Going above that is not going to help, but until you're at that point, you could still see improvements in your performance if you got stronger. So it's not a simple question to ask. It really not a simple question to answer. It very much depends on the athlete that you're working with, their sport, and their current level of strength.
Perfect, sir. Do you think that this kind of approach is in your experience when you came abroad in Europe, you definitely had got the chance to work with other soccer athletes. So could you might say that maybe this mentality of maxing out is like, something that belongs to US, and maybe here in Europe we are kind of, especially here in Italy, we're kind of afraid to take athletes to the gym because we got like some sort of, I don't know how to say, like some sort of belief, let's put it some this way, that we don't do enough strength training, and maybe the strength training is like kind of, the athletes, the old quotes that everybody listens to, like to make the athletes slow and especially here in Italy, we where football is the main sport here, so everybody is trying to achieve those kind of positions, and everybody's always neglecting strength, and that's we wanted you tonight because we truly believe in what you said, and that's strength must be achieved somehow. It doesn't really matter how much it is, but it must be achieved because it's the underpinning qualities that everything else comes to.
Sure. So, I think that's a very good way of putting it. As I mentioned to you before we started, I've never been to Italy. I've kind of followed some of what is done in Italian strength and conditioning. The country does have a history of producing reasonably good track and field athletes. Many of them, unlike their peers elsewhere in the world, tend to focus on plyometrics rather than strength. But I would say that, I think what you have seen and what you're seeing and describing, we actually see a little bit of it over here as well. So men's football culture in the US for the gym is not as good as women here. And part of that, I believe, is because the best men in the world are coming from Italy and from Spain and from Brazil, and there isn't as big of a weight room culture there. And these athletes are actually succeeding in spite of the fact that they're not fully physically developed. So they're brilliant on their tactical. They're brilliant on their technical skills. They are great with their psychological skills, but physically they're underdeveloped. They're certainly good athletes, but they're underdeveloped. You know, they in many of the top leagues in the world, they just buy the best athletes. They buy the fastest 18-year-old. They don't develop them. They buy the fastest 18-year-old. But if we were to say, look at a player like Ronaldo in football, or even say LeBron in basketball, if you want to be a great, an all-time great, if you want to have a long career, there's clearly one way to do it. You know, you have to max out all of these different physical qualities. Technical, tactical, psychological, physical. So on the women's game, however, the US is the top women's nation in the world. And there the women go through, the collegiate strength and conditioning system. And because our women are very strong and fast and they're overpowering over the rest of the world, we are actually, it's one of our primary advantages. I think when we play some other women's teams, we're not as technically, tactically oriented as those teams, but we're so physically dominant, we can still win. But on the men's side, we don't have that most of the time. So because our men maybe look up to many of the European players who are succeeding in spite of their lack of physical prowess, they make it up in other areas, but our men don't have that advantage of academies at 10 years old and the best football coaches in the world. So we do see that a little bit here as well, but it's I think what I'm seeing now in football is similar to what happened in the sport of golf about 15 to 20 years ago, and in the sport of maybe even the sport of American baseball. So what happened there was that these are sports that are very highly skilled, right? Let's take golf is a highly skilled sport. And it used to be, we had individuals playing it who didn't look like athletes, as most of us would consider. You know, they were older guys. They didn't look like they ever trained. They were just highly skilled. Well, then Tiger Woods came onto the scene, and he was an athlete who was clearly an athlete. You know, apparently he could run a 50-second 400 meters. He could bench press 140 kilos. So we took an athlete and put him into this sport, or developed it. Took someone who already had the genetic potential. Then they developed it through training, and then you gave them the skills, and now you have one of the all-time greats. And that's the recipe for success, right? If you are Ronaldo or LeBron or Tiger Woods, you're not leaving anything to chance. You know, you can be a very good player for a short period of time without all of the aspects that go into your sport. But even in these sports where technique and tactical come into play, at the end of the day, you don't want to leave anything underdeveloped. So why would you not try to get stronger, not try to get faster? My club really buys into what we're doing. We have been, especially on the women's side, physically dominant for several years now. Our players are much of the heart of the women's national team, and we, it really shows that our physical prowess on the field. We oftentimes are much stronger and faster and more enduring than other players, and a lot of times players in a sport like football don't see the connection between a squat and the game. And there's famously several football managers who said, well, there's no barbell on the pitch, or there's, until I have to, kick a dumbbell, we won't do it. So, but that's the wrong way of thinking of it. what we're actually training in the weight room or with sprinting is physiological specificity that exceeds the game. So if the game requires this level of capacity, we as physical trainers can develop someone to this level. So now if someone's physical capacity is up here and what the game requires is down here, now it should never be a problem for you to display your technical and tactical skills. But if the game requires this level of physical competency and you are right here, now you can't play 90 minutes. Now you can't, you're sprinting when you should be jogging. You can't get, you're always this far away from the ball. Even in a sport like football, we're really often talking about a game of centimeters, and taking someone from a squat of 1 times body weight to 1.5 times body weight, I can guarantee you will make you this much faster over 20 meters. I can guarantee it. If you go from a 1 times body weight to a 1.5 times body weight squat. And if you could sell an athlete on getting to the ball, 30 centimeters sooner, just by improving their squat a little bit, now it starts to make sense. How many more times can you be on the ball in a game if you're just 30 centimeters to that ball over a 20-meter span quicker? So it can be difficult even over here, but I think as a coach, you have to make those connections sometimes. And when you do have success, it helps with the buy-in.
Perfect, sir. Thank you very much for this answer, because we actually, in my opinion, like my little opinion, we need more people like you saying this kind of concept here in Italy, because we are, we see some crazy stuff like
I've seen some of it.
Okay. We've seen crazy stuff like being done from the elite level of football, SNCs. So it's kind of make you feel a little bit more good about yourself that you have those kind of beliefs. So thank you very much. So moving on, I would like to ask you a question in regards of power. And what you said before is that there's not, once you reach some sort of a strength benchmark, you don't actually need to pursue it any longer. So you have to just start developing the capacity of the athlete to lift those kind of weights, like a little bit less weights but faster. So could you explain a little bit about this concept that
Sure.
you briefly introduced before?
So what I'll say is that I don't quite look at it as like we're flipping a switch where you all of a sudden hit a certain strength threshold and then you stop focusing on strength and you do focus on power. The way I generally would look at it is that the weaker you are, the more you should focus on strength. And the stronger you are, the more you should focus on power. But even when we're strong, we're going to maintain strength. And even while we're very weak, we're still going to train power, just to a little bit lesser extent. So it will vary depending on how strong or weak the athlete is. Now, increasingly with my more advanced athletes, we work on developing power, especially if they're quite strong. And then even with my intermediate level athletes, one of the things that I increasingly implement is training with intent. So we will use submaximal loads in the range of 60 to 80% or so. But we perform the sets with full effort. So they try to move the bar as fast as possible. Sometimes the bar is heavy enough that it doesn't really move very fast. If they used 80% of their back squat max, the bar may only move at 0.9 meters per second. But if they're trying to move it as fast as possible, and I think that intent is very critical, especially it becomes really important for your track and field athletes. That's more obvious, trying to move fast, but especially with my football players, where we don't have, I see my football players in the gym once, maybe twice in a week. So we get a proper gym session say maximum of twice in a week. So again, it comes down to my desert island analogy. I don't have a lot of time to spend developing strength in the gym with these athletes. So if we just do the basics very well and we train with intent, you'll get better transfer. So there's some really fascinating research on training with intent, and also the use of augmented feedback for typically using velocity-based training measures, but there's some research with force platforms as well, which basically just suggests that if an athlete tries as hard as possible to move the load and they receive some feedback on that, then that same weight will improve performance in measures of sprinting, jumping, and change of direction to a greater extent. So if, for example, I use 80% of my back squat max and you use 80% of your back squat max, but I try to move it as fast as possible every day, and you just do the repetitions, even though we did the exact same sets and reps and percentage load, I will improve my sprint time, my jump time, my change of direction to a greater extent than you will. So this is almost this hidden variable where people don't consider it, that it actually allows us to use lower loads in the range of 60 to 60% sometimes on strength-based lifts and still see improvements on strength and power as well. So I do that quite a bit with all of my athletes, and with my football players who are only training once or maybe twice a week, if it's very effective. We may only do, say, 5 sets of 3 squats in a week. So rather than just go through the motions on those 15 squats, we might use 1 set as a warm-up, but then after that, we might increase our weight 60%, 70%, 80%. But every single set, we're trying to move as quickly as possible. So at no point in time are we wasting any repetitions. Most of the time you think, if I were to say, hey, we're going to work up to 80% squats. Well, you wouldn't just put 80% on the bar. You might do 50%, 60%, 70%, and then 80%. And a lot of times, if you were just going through the motions at 50%, you've just wasted that set. It's just a warm-up set. Well, if we put 50% on the bar and we try to move it very fast, now we've gotten the warm-up effect, but we've also gotten the fact that we're attempting to apply as much force as possible and generate power really quickly. So we start to work across the force velocity continuum, even in the same progression. We haven't changed any of the prescription. All we've done is make the athlete attempt to move faster. So I use that quite a bit. I'm a big proponent of velocity-based training. And even if you don't have the technology, you can still do velocity-based training. You just don't know the measures, right? On a power clean, if you catch a power clean and you're standing up tall, when you catch it, the bar was moving faster. If you have to drop down underneath it, the bar was probably moving slower. On a squat, when we do squats with my women's team, I tell them, make the bar jingle, right? So we need to stand up and the plate should jingle on the top. So they're exploding up so aggressively that the plates shake a little bit. You're only going to get that if they move fast. I don't need to have a velocity-based technology on all 25 bars to know that the bar is moving fast if they stand up fast and the plates start to jingle, or if the bar jumps off their back a little bit, or if I see them come to their toes. Those are indications that they're moving the bar fast. So even at lighter loads, we try to move it fast. And then when we try to move light loads as if they're heavy, and we try to move the heavier loads as fast as possible. They don't necessarily move fast, but the intent to move it fast is the goal.
Perfect, sir. Thank you very much for the answer. And that's especially about the second part about the VPT related answer, because maybe some of the practitioner don't have access to those kind of technologies. So it's kind of, that's where, in my opinion, coaching comes into place, in the sense of you actually realize that you don't need
Right. You
tracker
don't
or
need it.
whatever. Exactly. Maybe the tracker is something else that if you have it, it just confirms your beliefs, and
That's true.
that's exactly one great thing.
Yeah, and maybe sometimes we are so deep inside VBT and we lose something else. For example, we are so focused on VBT and we create
That's
a lot
right.
of confusion.
I love the sports technology, but it should never be a substitute for coaching. If you find yourself using velocity-based training technology and you're watching the device more than you're watching the athlete, you're not coaching. You're not doing it correctly. So the device should drive intent, but it should inform your own decisions and provide you with meaningful data, but it should never take away from your coaching. It's never a replacement.
Also, because as you said, you basically you have the chance to give some sort of like augmented feedback or whatever kind of cues that actually make those numbers, I guess, more easy to digest, to understand from the athletes itself, because watching the numbers going up, it's fine, but if you give some sort of cues and whatever, you can have, as you said, like more transfer over.
Yeah, for sure.
So we can move on the other question. So you've already mentioned something about soccer training in the gym, but can you please bring us inside typical soccer week training, for example, strength training, speed training, or conditioning training, just to be clear about that. Thank you.
Sure. So I have the very lucky to work with coaches who allow me to have input. We have a very good relationship with our manager, and so we've meshed our ideas quite well. So the way I plan the week with a football team is always going to be anchored by the match. So let's say we have a traditional week where we're playing on a Saturday. That's going to be the kind of the normal week around the world. If the match is a Saturday, in the US, we have to deal with very extensive travel, right? Across the US is basically across all of Europe.
Yeah.
So Sunday is a day we travel, generally speaking, if it is an away match. And if it is a home match, what we would do is we would have a session for the players that played less than 60 minutes. So they would actually have a top-up session on Sunday. So they may do a little bit of something on Saturday and then come in on Sunday. The players that played 60 plus minutes generally would have the day off on Sunday. Usually, unless we had a very difficult travel day on Sunday, we would practice on Monday. On Monday, we would have a day that was about, in terms of total distance, about 5K. Total distance, it would be more possession-based, maybe some small-sided games. I will run the warm-up. It will be more of a restorative warm-up, a little bit more static stretching, etc. I don't run any explicit conditioning on Mondays. On Tuesdays, we would have our biggest conditioning day. So we actually have dedicated conditioning sessions every Tuesday. We mix between kind of a lot of the stuff that I would really prefer to do, which is some more max aerobic speed work and perhaps some longer interval work. And what our coach likes, which he's been accustomed to for some time, is effectively continuous interval runs. So jogging followed by kind of faster runs. We'll do that where the athletes are spending probably on average about 6 to 12 minutes at 90+% of max heart rate. So that's a dedicated conditioning segment that is then followed by their field practice. The field practice would typically have some technical element in it, maybe 3/4 field game as well, for about 20 minutes. That day would be about 6.5K. In terms of total volume, that might be our biggest training day, 6.5 to 7K of total volume. Wednesday for us would look something similar in terms of my role to a Monday. So we'd play small-sided games, perhaps again, technical possession. I just run the warm-up in that day. Actually, Tuesday, we're also strength training. So they're coming in the gym on Tuesday. So that's match day -4. And then Wednesday would be one of our lighter days. Thursday, I run a dedicated speed session. So I would have an extensive warm-up, and then we go into a speed session. We're running about 200 meters of maximal sprint speed. And then following their speed session, they will go into their actual field session. Typically on Thursdays, this would maybe actually be our second biggest day of the week, somewhere on the order of 6K for the day. And sometimes they'll play 11v11 full field for short bouts, maybe couple 12-minute segments or something like that. And then Friday is our pre-match day. We do train on Friday. Some people are shocked to hear we'll sometimes get as much as 5K on a Friday, but usually it's around 4K on a Friday. And then Saturday we will play. And Saturday would be on Thursday. We may have a second gym session. Sometimes that gym session is a proper gym session in a week in the gym. And then sometimes I do a strength and plyometric session, body weight strength and plyometric session on the field. So lately we've been doing the gym session on Tuesday and a supplemental 20-minute plyometric and body weight strength session on Thursday, usually a little bit after the end of the field session. And then Saturday we would play. Our team, we train very hard. In general, we're achieving about 30K in a week, sometimes up to 35K, which is, as far as I'm aware, the only teams that I've seen that do that are some of the EPL Academy teams, where they're really just trying to train these younger boys. But we do that quite regularly, where the whole team is averaging about 30 to 35K. And 35K in the off season or weeks that we don't have any matches, about 30K when we do have a match. Generally speaking, what I like to see is that our weekly load is around 2.5 times what we achieve in a game. So if we're running about 12K in a game, then we're going to be around 28 to 30K in over the course of the week. But the places where I have the biggest role would be the conditioning day on Tuesday, the strength session that is in the PM on Tuesday, the speed session on Thursday, the supplemental strength session on Thursday, and then I run the warm-ups every day. If players are injured or returning from overseas, or we have a transfer, then it's my role to kind of make sure that they can get in shape. And then in the off season, I have the players, most of them, actually, many of them stick around. So they train with me as much as 2 hours a day in the off season as well.
Perfect. How do you manage to deliver those kind of strength session on the pitch? Like, as you said, like more oriented on body weight. What kind of, exercise do you focus
Sure.
on?
So you have to get a little bit creative. So For example, what we did last Thursday was we did 6 sets of a plyometric exercise. We did a version of a standing long jump into a vertical jump. So that was effectively a substitute for something like an Olympic lift, right? In the gym, they would start with an Olympic lift, but since we didn't go into the gym, we did 6 sets of this plyometric exercise. And then we went to a clap push-up. So they did a push-up with a clap. You know, these are, again, the women that I work with are incredibly impressive. They would outperform most men. They're doing 12 clap push-ups. And then for lower extremity, we did a single leg squat. So, you know, these are quite strong women, and you have to find a way to challenge them. A typical body weight squat wouldn't be enough to get them to a strength threshold. So we did a body weight single leg squat. Some of them could do a full pistol squat. Some of them would have to do a called a curtsy squat, where the leg comes slightly behind the body.
Yeah.
But it's quite challenging. You know, most of them I think can squat around 1.5 times body weight, and they still found those single leg body weight exercises to be challenging. In fact, when it was our second time doing that series last week, and they complained that it made them more sore than being in the gym. So we did 4 sets of 8 on the single leg squats, and then we did some long lever planks, long lever bridges to work on the hamstring and glutes, which are quite difficult as well. And then we did a partner plank row. So we're in a plank position, holding your partner and pulling in this position. Again, very challenging. It's just the trick is finding exercises that can challenge even the strongest athletes without an external load. So sometimes that is using leverage as your disadvantage, as the case would be for a long lever plank. Sometimes it might mean doing a single leg or single arm exercise, right? A single leg squat will challenge, you know, even the strongest athlete. A single arm push-up would be a very difficult exercise. Sometimes it's adding speed of movement emphasis, right? So maybe it's a clap push-up. Or the plyometrics. So you can find ways to turn even the simplest body weight exercises into more challenging forms for even advanced athletes. And then I try to keep my exercise selection relatively the same for about a 3 to 4 week block, just because I found that they get sore anytime you switch the exercise selection. So we will keep it the same for about 3 or 4 weeks and progress up in load or progress up in reps. And then we'll switch it up after about a 4-week period, just so that it doesn't get too stale.
Perfect. So that's exactly like, you know, I don't know how to say it, like changed like the point of view and just make those kind of simple movement patterns harder, then they actually feel the difference and they still get some sort of strength and power improvement also with the plyometrics.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, moving on to the last question. You already touched it a little bit before. I would like to ask you, how do you buy in sport coaches? Because, as I said before, here it's a kind of big topic. So, you know, it's always kind of hard to start a good conversation with the coaching staff and to make them realize that maybe we can, you know, we could try some other things that are not like just jumping on balls or stuff like that, and it's kind of hard because it's not that easy. So if you get any kind of suggestion to like a brand new strength coach.
So this is I'm going to start with a somewhat of a funny story here. So for all of I've worked for 5 managers, and up until my most recent one, the one that I'm working with right now, they all brought me in. So they recruited me to work for them. I didn't apply for the job. It was unsolicited. So I had buy-in before I started with them. They wanted me to work with them. But my current coach, he inherited me. So I worked the club.
The previous one.
They bought a women's club. My bigger club bought a women's club. The women's club moved to the area, and I was already working with the club, and they said, you should probably work with Mike. So he was reasonably successful, this manager before, and initially I don't think we were eye to eye. He didn't necessarily think that what I was doing was going to be the best way to do it. And it was the first time in my career that I had experienced that. So I used a couple things that came in handy. One is that you have to recognize that the manager is the one who's paid the most and the one who will probably get blamed for the wins and the blame for the losses, and probably get the most responsibility for the wins. So we always need to put ourselves in the mindset that we are support staff. That said, I knew that in terms of the physical development of players, I knew more than he did. This was my area of specialty. But if you go into any relationship, whether it's with a manager or your wife or your girlfriend or what have you, and you say you're wrong, let me tell you what's right, you'll never be successful. The better option is to educate, tell them, rather than even saying that they're wrong, to educate on the correct way. And then ideally, you place the idea in their head in such a way that they think that it's their idea. So you don't earn the credit for it, perhaps, by doing it that way. So you're not going to be the one that can say, I told you so, this is my idea. But in the end of the day, you become very cohesive. So right now, this current coach, we work fantastically together. He consults me on things before practice. I think he's, one of the most successful women's coaches ever. We've won several championships together, and it's just a mutual respect. He saw that I was, speaking all over the world and consulting with various teams. He saw that I had worked with some very successful teams in the past, and that I wasn't trying to take credit for myself, but I just wanted the team to be successful. So we had the same vision. So my goal was to not tell him that he was wrong, but was to say, here's a perhaps better way to do it, and be fine with him thinking that it's his idea, and then this is the funny part of the story, the thing that really got me buy-in was that this manager is an incredible Liverpool fan. So he lives in the US, but he's from Liverpool. He has Liverpool season tickets. He's had season tickets for many, many years, and he's on Liverpool podcasts. He talks about Liverpool at any chance he can get. Well, Liverpool invited me for a club visit 2 years back, and I just I was over and sent him a picture of standing next to a Champions League trophy. And from that day on, he listens to whatever I say. But seriously, we have a great working relationship, and I know that he is the boss in this type of setting, and but he recognizes that this is my area of expertise, and he has his area of expertise, and that we both want the same goal, and that whatever you can do as a coach, never make someone defensive, which is human instinct. If you told me that I was totally wrong, even though I may come to realize that, my initial response would probably be to become defensive. And you tell me I'm wrong, I'm going to tell you, no, you're wrong, even before I begin to actually think about it. So it's better off to just say, educate, present an idea, present the reason why. So I'm frequently, sending out little emails about different, research, or what this says about different small-sided games configurations, or athletes that are faster or slower, or why we need to do this work, or that kind of thing, just to make sure that the staff is educated. And then we do the same thing with the players. Last year we had to play in a bubble in Utah, which is at altitude. It's about 1,500 meters of elevation. And that comes with the issues of dehydration and difficulty with respiratory and aerobic capacity. And so we had a meeting, and I explained to the players, like, here's what we need to do. This is what's going to happen with your urine. This is what's going to happen with your first 3 days there. This is how you prepare for these headaches. And then we did the same thing I changed our GPS report formatting. So, and then when we did that, the visualization of the GPS report is different. And we just had a meeting, and I said, hey, now this is what you're looking at. These are the things that I value. This is why, what it means for your position. This is how you should be looking at it. And everyone buys into it now. So it's really just a thing where educate, never make anyone feel like they're stupid, because we all want the same goal.